The first thing Lorna Vasquez remembered was the smell of burned plastic and something older beneath it, iron, rock dust, the particular cold that has no name because no human language had ever needed one before. She opened her eyes. The sky above her was the color of a bruise 3 days old. 2 moons hung low on the horizon, one of them cracked through the middle like a dinner plate someone had dropped and glued back together badly. The light they threw was lavender and wrong. She lay in a shallow depression in the rock, her suit's emergency beacon blinking amber against the inside of her visor. Not red, amber, which meant the suit thought she was alive, which meant at least one system in the universe was operating on optimism. She sat up. Her helmet display read O2 remaining 41%, COMMS signal fault, suit integer IATI 94%, time in field 14:22:07. 14 hours, she'd been out for 14 hours. The landscape around her was not Mars. She'd spent 11 months in transit to Mars, had read every geological survey, had memorized the ridge profiles of Olympus Mons until she could sketch them from memory. This was not Mars. The rock here was too dark, too smooth, worn by something other than wind, worn by something that moved across it deliberately, repeatedly, over a very long time. The plane she was lying on stretched outward in every direction until it hit a ring of low formations that might have been cliffs or might have been something built. In the half-light it was impossible to say. She stood, her knees held. She checked her sidearm out of reflex, still holstered, still charged, and then she turned in a slow circle and found the wreckage. The Kopernika was about 200 meters behind her, spread across a quarter-kilometer of stone in pieces that ranged from intact crew modules to unidentifiable slag. The main drive housing had hit something and folded like paper. The secondary life support block, the orange one, she remembered it was always orange, was 30 meters to her left, intact, still hissing vapor from a cracked line. She walked toward it. She told herself she was walking toward the life support block for the O2 reserves, which was true, and she told herself she was not walking toward the wreck because she was afraid of what she'd find in it, which was less true. She found Ray's first. He was alive. He was sitting with his back against the secondary block, helmet off, eating something from a ration pack with the focused serenity of a man who has decided that eating is the only thing he can control right now. When he heard her footsteps, he looked up and his face went through 3 emotions in 2 seconds: relief, something complicated, relief again. "Captain," he said. "Raise." She sat down next to him, took the ration pack when he offered it, ate a mouthful of something that tasted like salted cardboard, handed it back. "Who else?" "Obi's inside, left arm's bad but she's mobile, Park and Suleiman." He stopped. "We pulled them out there under the tarp by the port module." She looked at the orange tarp 20 meters away, 2 shapes underneath it, very still. She looked at it for a long moment and then looked away. "What happened to us?" Ray's put the ration pack down. He had that look she'd learned to recognize over 3 years of working with him, the look he got when he was deciding how much of the truth was useful versus how much was just brutal. He'd been her navigator. He was the kind of man who always knew where he was, even when the answer was bad. "We were pulled," he said. "Something grabbed the Kopernika about 4 AU out from Mars and pulled us, like a current. I've never seen anything generate that kind of field, not in any propulsion literature, not in any weapons literature. Something reached out and took us, Captain, the way you'd take a stone off a path." She didn't say anything. "We were in transit for 9 days based on the suit logs, unconscious the whole time. Whatever took us, it didn't damage the ship until we got here. The damage is from the landing, not from the pull. Whatever it is, it wanted us intact." "Where is here?" "I don't know." He said it plainly, without apology. "The stellar cartography array is slag, but based on the moons, the atmospheric composition readings, we're not in the solar system anymore, not even close." She sat with that for a moment, the way you sit with something that you know is true but that your mind is still deciding whether to accept. "Okay," she said. "Okay. I need to see Obi, and then I need to know if the comms are actually dead or just damaged, and then..." She stopped. On the edge of her vision, beyond the far rim of the wreck field, something moved, low to the ground, very fast, and then gone. "And then we need to have a conversation about what's out there." Ray's followed her gaze, his jaw tightened. "You saw them too." "How many?" "I've counted at least 6 different," he searched for a word, "presences. They've been circling since I came around, staying outside the wreck perimeter, watching." She stood up, hand going to her sidearm and stopping there, not drawing, just resting. Something her firearms instructor had told her 15 years ago. Your hand on the gun says you know the situation is dangerous. Your hand not drawing the gun says you think there might still be a way through that doesn't end with someone dead. Keep your hand there. Give yourself time to be right. Have they made contact? Not directly, Reyes hesitated. About 6 hours ago I found a pattern scratched into the rock next to where you were lying. I didn't touch it. I don't know if it was there before you went down or if something put it there while you were out. She filed that show me later first Obi. Obi was inside what remained of the forward crew module, her left arm splinted with a piece of hull strut and medical tape, her expression carrying the specific irritation of a person who is in pain, and is choosing to experience the pain as an administrative inconvenience. She was a geologist. She approached most problems the way you approach an interesting rock formation, with patience, with instruments, with the understanding that the rock has been there longer than you, and probably knows something you don't. Captain, she didn't stand the arm. Sit, how bad? Ulna's cracked, possibly through. I've immobilized it, it's manageable, she paused. I've been running atmospheric samples through the suit's secondary analyzer. The air here is breathable. Not comfortable, CO2 is high, O2 slightly low but survivable without the helmet for short periods. I wouldn't make a habit of it. Lorna looked at her O2 display, 40%, good to know. There's something else? Obi pulled up her suit display, tilting the screen so Lorna could see it. A spectral analysis dense with numbers. The rock composition here isn't random. It has a repeating crystalline structure that doesn't occur naturally, not in anything I've ever cataloged. This entire plane is manufactured. We're sitting on something someone built. The word sat in the air between them. How old? Obi shook her head. The decay rates are, she stopped, a very long time, longer than our species has existed. Lorna looked at the floor of the module, which was also the floor of the plane outside, which was apparently the surface of something constructed by something that had been building things when humanity was still trying to figure out fire. She had a brief, vivid flash of how small this made her. She let it pass through her and kept moving. The comms were damaged but not dead. The main array was gone but the suit-to-suit relay was functional, and this was what mattered. The emergency beacon's subspace ping was intact. The problem was the subspace ping had a maximum range of about 4 light hours, which was fine if you were in trouble in the solar system and catastrophic if you were not. She sent the ping anyway. The universe didn't owe her an answer, but she sent it. Then she went to look at the scratches in the rock. They were not random, they were not decorative. They were, and this was the word that came to her unbidden and which she trusted, instructional. A series of concentric shapes, each one interrupted at a specific point, each interruption marked with a symbol that repeated. She photographed them with her suit cam and stood back and looked at them for a long time. It's a direction, she said. Reyes was standing behind her. You can read it. No, but I recognize the grammar, something telling something else where to go. She straightened up. Something left this for us while I was unconscious, while Reyes was the only one awake. She turned to him. You didn't see it happen. I was working on the O2 line. He met her eyes. I wasn't watching you every second. She held his gaze. There was something behind his expression that she couldn't quite read, and she had known this man for 3 years. Okay, she said and moved on. They came at dusk, or what passed for dusk under the lavender moons. 6 of them emerging from the rock formations at the edge of the plane in a loose arc formation, moving in the low gliding motion that she realized now she'd been seeing in fragments since she woke up. They were tall. Not grotesquely tall, not the kind of tall that exists only in bad science fiction, just tall, long-limbed, with a gait that suggested their joints didn't bend in the same places as hers. Their outer covering was the color of the rock, which was either camouflage or coincidence or something in between. Their faces, if she was reading faces correctly, were forward set, with sensory organs she couldn't categorize clustered around what she was choosing to call the mouth. They stopped about 40 meters out. Lorna stepped away from the wreck, alone. Hands visible, not raised. Raised hands was a human gesture and she didn't know what it meant here, just visible, spread slightly from her sides. She walked until she was halfway between her crew and the 6 figures and then she stopped. Nothing happened for what felt like a very long time. Then one of them stepped forward, the others stayed. This one was distinguishable from the rest by, she searched for the right description, posture maybe, the way it held itself. Not taller, not visibly different in anatomy, but it moved like it was used to things moving out of its way. She knew that quality. She'd cultivated it herself. She pointed to herself. Vasquez, she said. Captain Lorna Vasquez, ISEA vessel Copernica, Earth. She held up 3 fingers, pointed behind her toward the wreck where Reyes and Obi waited. 3, she pointed at the wreck. We came in that. She looked at the pieces of the Copernica spread across the plain. We didn't choose to. The figure watched her. Its sensory clusters moved, not the way eyes move, but with the same quality of directed attention. It made a sound, not language, not exactly, more like language's infrastructure, the rhythm and spacing without the phonemes. It was gesturing at her as it did, not aggressively, something that might have been a question. I don't know, she said, as if it had asked. I don't know what you want with us, I don't know why you pulled our ship here, but if you could have killed us you would have done it already, so we're still talking, let's keep talking. She didn't know if it understood a word. She suspected it didn't. But tone crosses always. She had learned this in 15 years of spaceflight, in negotiations with contractors and bureaucrats, and once, memorably, a Bolivian Port Authority official who didn't speak English and whose body language alone told her he was about to do something that would strand her crew for 6 weeks. Tone crosses. She put everything she had into her tone, not fear, not submission, but the specific message, I am still here, I am still looking at you, I have not run and I have not shot, that's all I've got right now, but it's real. The figure tilted its head, it made the sound again differently, then it turned and walked back to the group. That went well, Obi said, from directly behind Lorna. I told you to stay back. You told me to stay near the wreck, I'm near the wreck. She was standing 4 feet back, arm in its splint suit sealed, watching the 6 figures now conferring at the edge of the plain with the attentive patience she brought to interesting rock formations. They pulled the Copernica here on purpose. They left a message for you in the rock while they could have easily killed Reyes and me. They're not predatory, they're studying us. That's a leap. That's geology, you read the environment, the evidence is in the layers. They found the first thing missing at midnight. Reyes came to her, and the expression on his face was the one she'd learned to recognize over 3 years of working with him, the one he got when he was deciding how much of the truth was useful versus how much was just brutal. Except this time the calculation was already done. The answer was on his face before he spoke. The emergency transponder is gone, the physical unit, unbolted from the mount and removed. She looked at him. I'm the only one who's been in and out of the secondary module all day, he said. Obi's been with you, and he stopped. And you, she said. Yes. She thought of the marks in the rock. She thought of him saying he'd been working on the O2 line when the marks appeared. She thought of his face when she'd first come around, 3 emotions in 2 seconds, the complicated middle one. You're not going to tell me it was the Voakai, she said, are you? He shook his head, not denying something else, shame maybe, not quite. Something more specific than shame, the expression of a man who has done something he told himself was necessary and has now ended up in a place where the necessity is less clear than it once seemed. They offered me passage, he said. Before we launched, I didn't believe it was real. They have agents, he looked at his hands. I thought it was an intelligence test. I thought I was being recruited. I passed along sensor specifications, patrol route data, nothing that could, he stopped. They said they needed a way in, a ship that wouldn't be flagged. They said no one would be hurt. Park and Suleiman are under a tarp. The landing happened because we were pulled out of space by something with the power to do it, and they knew exactly where to pull us to, and they had that information because you gave it to them. Her voice was level. She was making a choice in real time about what kind of captain she was going to be in the next 60 seconds. I need to know one thing, Reyes. When they made contact after the crash, was the transponder removal part of the deal? A long pause, yes. And the marks in the rock, those were for you, not for me. They told me to orient you toward the central structure so you'd lead us there, he looked up. I was going to tell you, he shook his head. I was going to tell you. She stood for a moment, the lavender moons hung overhead. Somewhere on the far edge of the plain, the 6 figures were still out there, conferring, waiting. You're going to tell me everything, she said. Everything they told you about what's in the central structure, why they need humans inside it, what they're getting from this arrangement, everything. And then you're going to help me figure out how we use that information, because right now it's the only advantage we have. He blinked. You're not. You thought I was going to do something else with you right now, she turned toward the wreck. Come on, Obi needs to hear this. What the Voakai wanted, what Reyes had unwittingly sold them, was a biological key. He explained it in the flat, careful voice of a man narrating his own trial, and Obi listened without expression, and Lorna listened and worked. The central structure, the thing built into the rock of this manufactured plane, had been here for longer than humanity. The Volkai had found it, studied it, probed it. They could not open it. The structure's internal mechanisms were keyed to a biological profile that the Volkai, for reasons that had to do with their biochemistry, the specific electrical signature of their cellular metabolism, could not replicate. Human bioelectric fields, apparently, were something else entirely. They need us to walk through a door, Obi said. To open a door, Reyes corrected. From what I understand, just proximity activates the first stage. Going in, he shook his head. They weren't clear on what happens after. They weren't clear, Lorna repeated. No. She had built something while he talked. It had taken her 40 minutes and the contents of the emergency repair kit and one of the cracked hull strut sections and 3 pieces of the secondary block circuitry. She held it up. It looked like nothing in particular. She had learned a long time ago that the things that saved you rarely looked like much. What is that? Obi asked. The emergency beacon subspace emitter. The transponder's gone, but the emitter was in a different housing. She turned it in her hands. By itself it can't send a signal. The range is about 4 light hours, but if I can get it inside whatever is in the central structure, she looked at Reyes. You said proximity activates the first stage, that implies a power source. Obi straightened up. You want to use their door as a signal amplifier. I want to use whatever's inside it as a signal amplifier. I don't know if it'll work. I don't know if anything's close enough to receive. I don't know if we have any options that are better. She put the device in her suit pocket. But the Volkai want us to walk toward that structure, and we're going to walk toward that structure. We're just not going to carry exactly what they think we're carrying. Reyes was quiet for a moment. They're going to know. Maybe, probably, she looked at him. Do you have a better idea? He was quiet. Then help me figure out how to do this. They moved at first light, which arrived as a pale silver seeping under the lavender dark, and the 6 Volkai fell in around them at a distance of 30 meters, not escorting exactly, not threatening, but present in the way a current is present when you're swimming, moving alongside rather than behind. She kept her hand near her sidearm and kept her pace steady, and she didn't look at them directly. The central structure was 4 kilometers from the wreck site, and as they walked toward it, it became visible by increments, first as a darkness in the rock, then as a shape, then as something so old that the rock had grown up around it in a way that made it look like a natural formation until you were close enough to see the angles. Nothing in nature made angles like these. They were too precise, too deliberate, the geometry of a mind that had decided what shapes meant and had made them mean it. The entrance, if it was an entrance, was a vertical slit in the face of the structure, 3 meters high, wide enough for one person at a time. Lorna stopped 10 meters out. The lead Volkai moved forward past her toward the slit and then stopped, turned back. The sensory clusters focused on her with an attention that felt, for the first time, like urgency. They're waiting, Reyes said behind her. I know. Lorna, Obi's voice quiet, the atmospheric readings are spiking near the entrance, whatever's in there is active. She looked at the slit in the rock. She thought about what it meant to walk through a door you didn't choose, into a room that was built for something else, that had been waiting in the dark for longer than your species had existed, that had called you here by finding a crack in someone you trusted. She thought about Park and Suleiman under the orange tarp. She thought about the subspace emitter in her pocket and the odds, which she had not calculated precisely because she found that not calculating odds precisely was sometimes the only thing that let her act. She went first. The inside of the structure was not dark. That was the first surprise. It was lit by the same lavender light as the sky outside, but steadier, sourceless, filling the space from everywhere at once. The space was large, much larger than the exterior implied, with a ceiling lost in distance and walls that curved inward toward something in the center that was humming. Not audibly. She felt it in her chest, in the fillings of her back teeth, in the place behind her eyes where pressure headaches lived. The thing in the center was, she gave up on nouns. It was process, not object. It was something in the middle of doing something it had been doing for a very long time and would continue doing for a very long time. It looked like a column of structured light, except that light didn't have edges that precise, and it was generating the humming that wasn't a sound. And around its base the floor was etched with the same concentric interrupted patterns as the marks in the rock outside. The Volkai stayed at the entrance. She walked to the center. She heard Obi and Reyes behind her, their footsteps on the etched floor, and then she felt it, the activation that Reyes had described, happening not as a mechanism but as a recognition. The column of structured light shifted, adjusted. It had been running one program and it was switching to another. She could feel it deciding. She pulled the emitter from her pocket. The power readings on her suit display were climbing. Whatever this thing was, it was generating field energy in quantities that made the numbers meaningless. She had designed the emitter as a parasite, clip it to a power source sufficient to overcome its range limitations, and the signal would travel. She didn't know what the structure's reach was. She didn't know if Earth was in range. She didn't know if the ISEA monitoring arrays were on the correct frequency. She was operating on the specific human certainty that doing the thing was better than not doing the thing, and that the worst outcome was the same either way. She held the emitter near the column. The light moved toward it. There was a moment, 3 seconds, maybe 4, where she felt the entire thing considering her, not with malice, with the specific curiosity of something ancient encountering something new. She was a variable it hadn't modeled. She was a crack in its certainty, and for those 3 or 4 seconds it hung in the balance, and she stood very still and let it look. Then the emitter's charge light went from amber to white. Her suit display showed the subspace ping sending, and sending, and sending, the signal boosted by orders of magnitude beyond its original parameters, rippling outward through whatever medium this structure used, crossing distances she had no reference for. She watched the display and she thought, very clearly and without drama, if there is anything out there listening, now would be the time. The Volkai knew immediately. She felt the change at the entrance, a sound from multiple sensory clusters at once, a rapid overlapping vocalization that she read correctly as alarm. The lead figure crossed the threshold for the first time, entering the structure, moving toward her with a speed that the 30-meter circling had not prepared her for. She drew her sidearm. Not at the Volkai, she pointed it at the column. She didn't know if the threat was credible. She didn't know if destroying the column would harm anything the Volkai cared about or would simply remove the thing keeping her alive. She held the weapon pointed at the column and she looked at the lead Volkai and she said, "We're going to stand here until my signal is received, and then we're going to talk about what happens next, and you're going to find that humans are significantly more interesting as participants than as subjects. But that is how this goes. Not the other way." The Volkai stopped. The signal kept sending. She stood there for what she would later calculate as 2 hours and 19 minutes. Reyes stood to her left, saying nothing, doing the math she wouldn't let herself do. Obi stood to her right, watching the Volkai with the patient attentiveness she brought to interesting rock formations. Lorna stood in the center of something ancient and deliberate, and held her ground with a charged weapon pointed at a thing she didn't understand, and waited. The rescue carrier Breck dropped out of whatever transit the structure had enabled 42 hours later, its sensors reading the amplified ping from 318 light-years away, with a clarity that the crew would later describe as impossible. The ISEA would spend 11 years arguing about what that meant and what the structure was and who had built it and what rights any of it implied. Treaties would be signed and broken. The Volkai would prove to be not peaceful but comprehensible, which turned out to be almost the same thing over time. Lorna Vasquez would testify before 4 different commissions. She would be asked, many times, what she had been thinking when she pointed a weapon at the central column of a structure that humanity had barely begun to understand, in a room full of beings whose intentions she could not read, 200 billion kilometers from the nearest human authority. She always gave the same answer. She had been thinking that there was a signal to send and a weapon to hold and a crew to bring home, and that when you have a task you keep working the task, and that the universe had never once given her anything by waiting for permission. She'd been thinking about Reyes too, about what to do with a man who had cracked and had at the last stood beside her, about whether the category of betrayal had subcategories and whether those subcategories mattered and whether she was the kind of captain who believed they did. She hadn't fully decided. She suspected she wouldn't fully decide for a long time. She'd been thinking about Park and Suleiman under the orange tarp. She thought about them every day. But mostly she'd been thinking that the emitter was charged and the signal was out there, and that the only thing left to do was stand still and mean it. The way you stand when you know someone's going to have to blink first. And you've decided it isn't going to be you. Say,